Make yourselves comfortable, please. Mr. Lipmann, can you, for the transcript, tell us your full name, please?
Bryan David Lipmann.
Bryan with a Y.
With a Y.
And Ms. Rice, can you please tell us your full name?
Kate Rice.
Thank you. Mr. Lipmann, you're the CEO of Wintringham?
Correct.
Is Wintringham the full legal title?
Yes.
It is. And how long have you held that position?
I started the company in August 1989.
Right. And can you tell the Commissioners a little bit about Wintringham, please?
Yes. Wintringham is a service for elderly homeless people or people at risk of becoming homeless.
Yes.
That's our sole target group. Do you want to know the history of it, or I'm not sure what you want?
We'll just hit the pause button there for a moment, and we'll come back to a bit about the history. Before, just introduce myself to Ms. Rice. Ms. Rice? Is that how you'd like to be addressed?
Yes,
Ms. Rice?
that's fine.
Thank
Yes,
you.
thanks.
And you also work for Wintringham?
Yes,
And in what capacity?
Yep. So I'm currently the residential care manager of a site in Coburg in Melbourne of 51 residents.
Now, for the purposes of the Royal Commission, Ms. Rice, have you made a witness statement dated the 13th of June 2019?
I have.
And do you have a copy of the statement with you there?
I do.
All right. It'll also come up on the screen in a moment. Operator, it's wit.136.0001.0001. Have you had an opportunity to read through that statement before giving evidence this afternoon?
Yes.
And is there anything in it that you wish to change?
No.
All right. And are the contents of the statement true and correct?
They are.
I tender the statement of Ms. Rice, Commissioners.
Yes, the witness statement of Kate Rice dated the 14th of June 2019 will be Exhibit 5-18.
I think it's 13 June, Commissioner. If I said 14, my apologies. It's 14, I stand corrected. It is 14, I'm sorry. And Mr. Lipmann, have you also made a witness statement for the purposes of the Royal Commission?
I have.
And that's a statement dated the 11th of June 2019?
Yes, that's right.
And is there anything in your statement you'd like to change or amend?
Well, just something petty.
Yeah, well, go on.
On page 4, I love Wintringham with all my heart, but I don't necessarily say Wintringham.
Thank you. So, very last line, as much as you love it, just one Wintringham
That will
will do.
be sufficient.
Okay. So we'll delete the second Wintringham.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else you'd like changed?
No.
Okay. And are the contents of the statement with that change made true and correct?
Correct.
I tender the statement of Mr. Lipmann dated the 11th of June 2019.
Yes, the witness statement of Bryan David Lipmann dated the 11th of June 2019 will be Exhibit 5-19.
Now, Mr. Lipmann, we will go back to the question I asked you a moment ago, and you volunteered to tell us briefly, if you could please, about the history of Wintringham. What brought you to establish the company?
Well, I suppose it started in about 1969.
Yes.
I headed off to Western Australia with my girlfriend on an old motorbike which blew up. But we eventually got here, broke, and ended up doing some farming work. So for 14 years I was a jackaroo and a shearer, a slaughterman, and eventually changed my profession and became a social worker. Probably the first slaughterman in history to become a social worker. And I got a job at Gordon House, which was the largest night shelter for homeless people in Australia. And it was 300 people living in a 10-storey building. It's really difficult, as I've tried to explain in the statement, just what that place was like. It was, there was acts of wanton kindness, but there was also appalling violence, and it's really difficult to imagine anyone living there, but particularly frail elderly people. But I guess I didn't really notice it as much until my parents got frail and sick, and then I needed to get them services. And I was amazed at the quality of the services, aged care services in Australia, was because I knew nothing about it, and they got terrific care. So I was going to visit them and then coming back to Gordon House, where my old guys were dying, often being bashed or raped or murdered, in fact. So with the great encouragement of a man, Peter Hollingworth, I tried to create a new organisation. I left Hanover and tried to create Wintringham.
You mentioned in your statement of paragraph 16 that part of the process involved approaching the aged care minister at the time, Mr. Peter Staples.
Yeah.
What were the circumstances in which you came to talk to Minister Staples, and what was the conversation?
Well, you have to remember it was 30 years ago. I was a relatively young fellow, and I met a lot of people in a lot of a hurry, so I can't exactly explain how I got to so many different ministers and politicians, but I certainly was pretty determined to get something done. At the time, when I raised the issue to government, that there were old people dying in the night shelter, they said that they were homeless and aged, and there was a very fine homeless service system in this country called the SAP system, and there they would be cared for. But SAP is never designed for aged, frail people. It's designed for crisis accommodation. And I wrestled with that for a while, and then eventually decided that what I should say to them was that they weren't homeless and aged, but they were aged and homeless. So that switches the paradigm. So then you start to say that they're aged and therefore eligible for aged care, just as much as saying they're aged and Greek or aged and a war veteran or aged and living in Mayford. They're aged. And that argument was accepted by Peter Staples, and he became a champion of Wintringham, which was it's very, very interesting. I was just discussing that a few minutes ago with some other people. You can have great ideas and you can be very firm and forceful in those ideas, but at some stage along the line you need powerful people to sign on. And whether they do it voluntarily or whether they're forced is two different issues, but Peter enthusiastically volunteered to assist, and I just don't think I could have started Wintringham without the assistance of Peter Staples.
Thank you, Mr. Lipmann. And that ability to win friends and influence people has become a bit of an art form by you, hasn't it? Particularly you mentioned that public servants and others that have been very supportive and assisted you over the years.
Yeah, I wanted that to be noted in the statement because it's true. The aged care system is designed for people, as far as I can understand, who are about 85, middle class, white Anglo-Saxon, with an aggressive daughter to lobby on their behalf. And I don't mean that in a pejorative way, I just mean it's invariably the daughters or daughters-in-law that do the work. Our guys are quite different. They're more liable to be 65, working class, male, resistant to care. And that opened up a really important issue for, I guess, the way that we've run Wintringham in the interspersed 30 years, because the first 2 years I was the only employee. Now we've got about 700. But I came to see myself as a housing worker, into which we put aged care services, which is quite different. So when my mum went into aged care, she transferred from a house to aged care. So the only real difference was the care. For our guys, the real issue is the housing. And often they have to be encouraged to accept the care. So it's a bit of a generalisation, but I've always seen myself primarily as a housing worker.
Now you mentioned your guys, they're mainly men, but there are women who are housed at Wintringham.
Yes, they are. The community care is probably more female, and Kate ran that for a while and can speak to that, whereas our residential is more male. I didn't quite finish my last statement, that was my fault. In the process of getting it started, with an $18 billion industry, there's a lot of, I guess, not mundane, but step-by-step approach to running such a huge industry. For Wintringham to come up with such a different client group, which clearly the Aged Care Act was never intended for, was an enormous challenge. So it's one thing for a minister of government to say, yes, you're eligible. It's altogether another issue to say how that's going to work. And that process, over 30 years, I've had nothing but terrific support from senior bureaucrats in Canberra, and it really should be acknowledged that, again, I couldn't have done it without them. It's been a collegiate affair, lots of vigorous arguments, discussions, but at the bottom line, they accept that elderly, poor, or at risk of homelessness, or homeless, are entitled to aged care as much as any other outlier group.
Now, we did have some discussions, or rather the Office of the Royal Commission spoke to you about the possibility of a resident or two coming over with you. That proved too difficult, as it turned out, but we've got the next best thing, I suppose, which is a video that was produced externally to Wintringham. Do you want to just tell us briefly about the circumstances in which the video came into existence, and then we'll play it?
Yes, Minister Wyatt was the Aged Care Minister up until a few months ago. Has in a terrific initiative, I guess perhaps because of his own Aboriginality, but looked at how diverse groups access aged care. And so he set up a committee to work with giving the industry and consumers ways to get into aged care that might not normally fit. And so the first three were LGBTI, Aboriginal and COLD. And now it's working on the homeless, and I'm working on that group. And Craig Gear from the Old Persons Network facilitated a meeting here in Canberra, and I'm always in Canberra, in Perth. And as part of that, he asked if he could photograph record some of our residents, which I was a little bit against. I didn't think it was needed, but he persuaded me, and he was right. It really did make a huge difference, and it had a great effect on the personnel there, and certainly encouraged the minister to visit himself. And just before you do it, can I ask, to say one thing?
Of course.
We get an awful lot of visitors coming from interstate and overseas, and we're always a little bit toey about it because it is people's homes, and you probably haven't had this statement before, but I just wanted to acknowledge the Wade Commissioner and your staff have visited twice and shown great respect to our staff and our residents, and I really appreciate that.
Be an appropriate time to play the video, Mr. Lipmann. It's tab 23 in Exhibit 5.7, the General Tender Bundle. It's about 9 minutes, I think. Is that right?
I don't know.
Thank you.
Everybody just calls me out, nobody knows my name. Or Melbourne. My mum said I was out in the cabbage patch with some rabbits. Joined the railways, went out to PNG, got bored of that. I was doing the telegrams. Worked at small yards. Yeah, done a few hot jobs here and there. I've been unemployed now for 10 years. I'm 60 now, I can still stand and walk. I still could be mining. Health-wise, not very well. I'm chilled breathing, so that's the first thing I go for when I wake up. Before I was living here, I come from a caravan park, third world, jockeys everywhere, you had to watch where you stepped. Yeah, too much trouble there was. I was there for 2.5 years. The first night I moved in, I think I cried myself to sleep. I was like, I come from a beautiful three-bedroom home to this shithole. It was that hot in summer, freezing in winter, those caravans. I prefer to be on the street than live in that caravan park. Then about a week before it closed, I was over there, I was here. I was doing nice gigs.
I've been travelling around since I was about No, pardon me. I've been working since I was about 15. There's always hay baling or cotton chipping or fruit picking or grab swag and head to the nearest town. When I was in my 20s, I lived at, I was working at Grace Brothers at Bondi. Basically, I've just been a drifter most of my life. In those days, you could sleep anywhere you wanted, nobody would bother you, they'd leave you alone. Nowadays, a friend of mine got kicked to death in a churchyard, so it's not good to be drinking on the streets nowadays. When you're living in boarding houses or just rooms, there's always problems. I was on the drive and I was getting sicker and sicker. I've got into cinema, I'm not a very well man, so I can't carry a swag anymore. I'm flat out carrying groceries home. If I wasn't living here, I don't know where I'd be. I could be dead, I could be anywhere living on the streets, or I'd end up in hospital or something. I don't want to be wealthy, I just want to be well off, just enough. If I've got enough, that's all I need.
I grew up in North Carlton. I worked at the Hilton, the Windsor, and Melbourne Zoo, just as a barman and a kitchen hand. I'm 55 now. I've been here for 3.5 years. I've been in the wheelchair for about 4 years, and the physio comes around. I've got one of the walking trolleys, and we do about three laps of the facility. And the other places where I've been, they had stairs and, it wasn't any good. Like, I've been into four places like this, not as good as this. Well, if I wasn't living here, I'd be living on the street, I suppose, yeah. It wouldn't be any good in this weather.
I lived in a flat north Wintringham. I was so sick I couldn't look after myself. I was on my own. My partner died 2010. Because we were together, nearly 30 years, drinking, and he dropped dead because of it. I had no friends, they all died, mate. They all died from drinking drugs. Then I became depressed. And schizophrenia is a bad thing. And the alcohol, I was drinking so many cars, so many, on my own. I think the loneliness was killing me, mate. In my flat on my own, the loneliness. That's what was killing me. Here, my brother and the kids, here, they're in Sydney. They won't have nothing to do with me because I'm an alcoholic. So I was a teenage alcoholic, and it was pretty rough and rough. My workers from Launch Housing told me about these places that I didn't want to go, and I didn't go. One phone call when I was desperate and sick, and I ended up here, mate. A detox in here.
I was about 7 years old when I come to Australia from England. Most of my life I spent over in Western Australia. I was a mortician. I lived in South Yarra with my wife. And she's passed on now. And things were going downhill, So the caseworker suggested I come here. I was drinking too much and never drugs though, never. Yeah, well, if they didn't bring me here, I'd be walking the streets or sleeping under a bridge or something. Next September I'll be 73 and I intend to go to 104. when the King or the Queen sends me a letter congratulating me, I'm going to wipe my bum on it and send it back to them and say, don't waste taxpayers' money. I'm going to get married again to a nice girl here, got a heart of gold.
Oh, it's a long story. Let's just say that my son's girlfriend took over the house and kicked me out. I know, it's weird. I've been here for 4 years. Originally came here because I was in like a women's refuge, I suppose, and it was very unsafe there, mainly because there was a lot of drugs and knives and things in the place where I was. But I remember one stage I had 5 women in my room hiding from one of the residents. And then I heard about this place through a social worker and moved in. Well, we're talking about elderly women in the community who become homeless. But I think that it's a very vulnerable place in life, because it could be through divorce, through alcohol, through drugs, through a lot of different things, and then they need the care because they're lost. I used to have a boyfriend. He lived here too, but recently he's moved to another facility and he's got dementia. So I went to visit him and he hardly recognised me, and we always had plans of moving out together and getting a little flat and going to the market and cooking. And I don't know, sometimes I can't see beyond here. I just, whether I've forgotten or, hey, I'd love to travel, love to go to Europe again.
Thank you, Operator. Ms Rice, I didn't really ask you much about your role as a manager. Can you tell us about your time with Wintringham, please?
So I've been at Wintringham now going into my 18th year.
Yes.
So a very long time in my social work career, I suppose. And I've worked in 4 different jobs in the company, usually under suggestion from Bryan about trying something new or putting my skills into another area of Wintringham. So that's probably kept me fresh and kept me going for so long, yep.
And what's your current role?
So currently I manage one of our homes, residential aged care homes, in a suburb in Melbourne, inner city suburb called Gilgunya. So I've done that this is my 5th year.
Right.
Yep.
And is that a similar setup to the one in Port Melbourne that Commissioner Tracy visited?
Yes, very similar. So just slightly bigger, but certainly in terms of its design, the staffing concept and the small house model, it's very similar. Yeah.
And how many residents live at Gilgunya?
So I've got 51 residents there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how does that compare to the numbers at Port Melbourne?
Similar? So Port Melbourne, there's 30.
Smaller.
Yeah, a bit smaller. 35, sorry. Yeah.
And we saw in the video the design, the accessibility and so on. How important are those features of the houses, that style of design? How important are they in terms of the care, provision of care?
Yeah. So I think they contribute to our ability to do our job and to provide really good care. But I think, as I've often thought, I think we can do good care regardless of the buildings and the environment, but I think the buildings and the environment obviously enhance our ability to do it well and are obviously designed with older people in mind, certainly older homeless people. But I think from the feedback that I get, that a lot of people would like to live in the places that we operate, regardless of their background and circumstance. So a lot of people come in and visit and say, I'd like my parent to live here, or I'd like my family member, and that's regardless of their background.
Do you use a particular architect, Mr Lipmann, for the design of the houses?
We have for a long time. Alan Kong has built a number of our facilities. It's actually interesting, the can I talk a little bit about the buildings?
Please.
The buildings are primarily natural materials. So instead of concrete, there's bitumen. Instead of brick, there's wood. There is brick, but it's much more of a softer design. They're not straight lines, there's lots of curves. We experiment with small house models. In fact, while some people say they do house models, they often are clustered around a car park. Ours are more clustered around garden area.
Yes.
One of the things that I did say to Alan at the time of the building is that I wanted something that was going to be hostile to visitors. And probably needs a bit of explanation. We didn't mind visitors, of course, but we wanted them to realise that they were going in someone's home. And as one of the witnesses earlier today mentioned, we have a very similar view. People should feel that they are working in someone's home and not living where someone works. So it's quite exciting, really, when a visiting architect or a visiting dignitary rings to say, I've been driving up and down the street and I can't find it. That's a huge compliment, really, isn't it? The other thing about the verandas is that verandas are a very old, traditional form of Australian architecture, which has largely disappeared nowadays with the advent of air conditioning.
Yes.
But I can remember when I was jackarooing that there was always a big house and always an old fella in a chair and a moth-eaten old dog nearby. And as us jackaroos, we would lean and talk to the guy and learn so much about not only just life, because we were just kids, but about early Australia, farming, etc. You can imagine if he was inside the house as a young fellow, I would never have had the courage to knock on the door and ask his wife, could I speak to Mr. So-and-so about the past? So we find that the verandas are a huge way of giving an opportunity to our guys to interact, because our guys are full of men and women, full of extroverts, full of very shy people. They're a total cross-section of the community,
Yes.
just like the people in this room. So those people who do want to interact can sit in the veranda, they can meet people as they go past, they can talk to them, they can interact, smoke, which is good because they are smokers, unfortunately, and I don't want my young staff picking up smoking-related diseases, but by the same token, I don't want to tell the guys that they can't smoke. So it enables a party atmosphere at times, or at least, as I've said in my statement, a joyful.
Yes.
It is joyful working and living at our places. Not always, but we're not perfect by any means. There are very hard times at times, but it certainly facilitates. And I totally agree with what Kate says. I often say to visitors, stop looking at the buildings, look at the care. Because the buildings are spectacular, that's true, but that's not the point. I'm quite sure if we took over an institutional place, our staff would turn it into a home very quickly.
One of the themes we're interested in this week, perhaps I can address this to you, Ms. Rice, is risk, and the buzz phrase that one hears is the dignity of risk. And Mr. Lipmann, you mentioned the smoking, and with the particular cohort of residents that you have, I take it that the challenges of smoking, we heard about alcoholism on the video, present particular challenges for you to strike the right balance. Ms. Rice, can you expand on how that's done in a practical sense? You allow people to smoke, you allow people to drink, but how do you manage risk in that context?
Well, I mean, it's interesting in the context of all this person-centred care discussion, because someone's right or wish to, say, drink or smoke or participate in gambling or any of those other activities to us are no less important, in a sense, to honour than someone who might, want to do gardening, for example. They might just be different interests. So what we really have to do, and we do this very carefully and it takes a long time, is really assess what that person wants to do. And if it is to participate in an activity that might cause them harm, in a sense, like drinking or smoking, for example, what we need to do is really assess with them and their representatives and occasionally family about allowing that person to do that in a context that's minimising harm to them. And usually for our residents, it's actually about what they can also afford, because we've become very good at knowing and supporting people who are pension only.
Yes.
So in reality, you have $200 a fortnight left. And you take out all their costs, and so you really are looking at, this is actually how much you've got left. That means you can actually smoke 11 cigarettes a day. It's nuts and bolts stuff.
Yes.
And then we work with that resident around setting up a program so that it's manageable financially, it doesn't cause risk particularly to them, and it also manages the behaviours that potentially come with addictions. Because I've heard Bryan refer to a lot that people are, 2-day millionaires on the pension, because they get paid and all the money's gone in a couple of days, and then for us to try and support residents for a full fortnight, for example, who had no money or have smoked all their cigarettes, you're getting a lot of difficulties. So we really manage that as well. And it actually works quite well. But people who visit us are quite amazed when we show them our management system of cupboards where we have alcohol stored and managed and distributed, as well as cigarettes. But it's a really sensible, respectful way to do it, because people can actually get through their week and their day if that's what they're choosing to do.
I guess one of the things that we use harm minimisation as a model of care.
Yes.
I think it's really important for, I don't know, whoever's listening, that Wintringham doesn't deal just with guys who drink heavily. I mean, there is a section of them who do. But there's a section in any aged care facility that does it, and often they're just not allowed to do it, so therefore the behaviours kick in. But yeah, we're more about harm minimisation, so it's saying we don't necessarily condone your activities, but if you're going to do them, we want to manage them in a way that will minimise the risk and harm to that person.
Thank you. If I can just tease that out a little bit more, I think you were in the hearing room before when Mr. Marmarellis of Wynn was talking about 90-year-olds riding Harleys and some other similar scenarios. You've got a couple of your own, haven't you, in the statement, Mr. Lipmann, involving tattoos and parachuting?
Well, we've got many. I think one of the... Before just we go on to some examples, I think the theory behind it is perhaps of interest to the Commission.
Absolutely.
It's about saying, so we don't use that term person-centred care. We don't necessarily disagree with it. It's just something that I had never heard of really until I was asked to present. But we were asked what that would mean to us, and I guess to me it's how I'd like to be treated myself. There's a proliferation of theories and academics, good worthy academics are making a lot of money developing models and ideas about that. But really, it's awfully simple what I think Wintringham is. I don't think that anything we or I have done at Wintringham is particularly... it's not rocket science. It's just treating people how you'd like to be treated. Or if you put it in a just slightly different way, how would you like your parent or your grandparent treated? And so it's a matter of getting to know the person and spending time with them. The other interesting thing that Wintringham faces is that we very rarely intersect with families. There's a whole lot of reasons for that, I guess, but we don't have a lot of family connections. I can remember visiting my mum in aged care on Christmas Day, and it was like a bun fight trying to get in there. Then I went from there to one of our facilities, and my wife and I were the only visitors for the day. So it gives you some idea. We can talk later on about death, because I think that's a really interesting aspect of it. So we replace families with, or not replace, but we put a huge emphasis on recreation or diversion. So we have 52 at this stage recreation workers. They're all trained and they all have a budget. And how they work it is that a resident will come in and the recreation worker will sit with that resident for as long as it takes to find out what they want to do with the rest of their life. And I think this is something that Kate and myself have often talked about. I guess I'm allowing myself to get sidetracked, but aged care should be a lot more than just care. You're living at home, and then you're living an ordinary life at home, no matter how restricted you are. And then because of some physical ailment, you end up in aged care. But what happened to the other part of your life? That shouldn't just be run by nurses and personal care attendants. They've got a huge role to play, massive role to play, probably the dominant role. But there should also be a role for life, for joy, for satisfying the needs and the wants that a person still has at an older age. And I think social work is certainly one of those professions that can assist in that. And I would often wonder what the Aged Care Standards and the Aged Care Act would look like if it was written by social workers instead of nurses. But anyway, that's another side. But we can't do our work without nurses. And we have some of the finest nurses in the whole industry working with us, and we couldn't literally do our work without them. But there is a role for other players as well. And a key part of that role is the recreation. And we have a number of recreation workers, and they'll work with each individual to find out what that bucket list of things they want to do that they haven't got around to doing. And some of them are quite humble, but some of them are quite exciting. You wanted some examples, so we had one guy who was very, very reclusive, and he really wouldn't engage with our workers, but for some reason, somehow or other, he got hold of a chess set, and he decided that this is something he really wanted to pursue. And so then he presented the worker with an enrolment form for a chess competition, which just happened to be in Germany. But our worker, instead of dismissing it and smiling off and saying, that's cute, whatever, he took it to me. That afternoon, I'd arranged funding for him to get there, and he flew to Germany, entered the international chess competition, was knocked out in the first round, but had a great experience. We had another instance, I know you like me telling you this one, is we had an elderly woman in high care. As it turned out, she probably only had about 18 months to live, but she was certainly extremely vivacious and liked to be acknowledged whenever you turned up. And she told her staff one day that she was a clean skin and she wanted a tattoo, something that she'd always wanted and never got round to doing it. So again, our staff go through the whole matrix of risk assessment. First off, does she really want to? Is this just a passing whim? And then, is she competent to make a decision? So these things take a little while to work through. And then when that was all satisfied, then they went to the various medicos to see if her skin integrity could cope with the tattoo, because she's a frail lady. They said yes. So she went to the tattoo parlour with our staff, got a tattoo, proudly showed it off to everyone. And when I came a little while later, she told me she was going to get another one, but she's not going to tell me where.
Thank you.
But lots of stories. One of the stories that actually is the simplest one, but really inspires me, is that we have a large range of housing too. And there was a housing Ron who wanted to walk around the golf course. And again, our staff, instead of taking him there, sat down, Danny, sat down and worked out a public transport route to get to this golf course. And the two of them went the first time. And then after this, the guy went on his own. And then he started to see everybody playing golf, so he ended up getting a stick and just knocking the ball around. And slowly, the story can go on for as long as you like, but eventually he got some sticks and started playing. And the other guys wanted to know what he was doing, so he told them, so they got some sticks. And it turned out that twice a week, the 4 guys would go to the golf course and play a bit of golf. That all came about because our worker empowered him to find a way to do it himself. And That's obviously a housing story, let alone an aged care story, but still it's the same principle, to empower people to make decisions. That's our staff's role, is to make that happen, and not to drop me in the whatever, to protect me so that I will allow them to do these things, but they have to follow all sensible precautions and ensure that the client knows what they're doing and that they're capable of doing it. I might say that's probably a little bit easier because we don't have too many families. I could imagine we had a guy jumped out of an aeroplane. Now that's, when you had a woman that did the same thing, that probably would have been much more difficult if family members had said there's no way that Dad's doing that, whereas this guy, it was his decision solely.
Thank you. Ms Rice, can I ask you a little bit about staffing, both recruitment and training? What are you looking for in staff to work at Wintringham?
So certainly one of the things that I always try and do is I try and be involved in the recruitment myself.
Yes.
So I think it's interesting because it's probably a historical thing that when I was in the community, I would do a lot of the interviews for case managers, etc. And then when I moved into a residential care setting, I couldn't quite understand that as a manager why I wouldn't be still involved, whether that's choosing someone who works in the kitchen, cleaning, care staff, nursing. So I always make an effort to be involved in those recruitment processes. And I think for me, what I'm really looking for, again, is people's interest and commitment to older people. I mean, certainly for us, an interest or understanding about social justice or poverty or homelessness is an added bonus. But there's a lot of people that apply for jobs with us that haven't had that experience. They don't really know anything about homelessness, but they might tell me in an interview about the relationship they had with their mum and how they cared for their mother, or something in their private life around their respect for older people. So I think it's often those personal answers for me that really jump out about what would make potentially a really good staff member. And I think for me, you can train staff to do lots of the different day-to-day jobs, the practical things, because everyone comes with sort of that ability. And I think we can train and teach people how to do a lot of that good care. But I think it's that attitude and view on older people, and again, people are talking about that relationship word that's really important.
Yes.
So often, sometimes I've sat with HR and they'll think that person really doesn't have any experience. And I just go, no, I just want to give them a go.
Yes.
And then you really have to try, and I also look for people who might be interested in a pathway through aged care and Wintringham, because I think that's what we offer people too. So I try and excite them about the job, because I'm excited about working in aged care. I love it. So I think if I love it, I want to find other people who are equally as excited as me. Yeah.
Yes. Mr. Lipmann, did you want to add something?
Well, yeah, I need to say that the byproduct of everything Kate says is we have the most amazing staff loyalty. I've read in the papers about aged care providers struggling to keep staff or get them. I have a 5-year award that's signed by the President himself and a cash grant. I've done 380 of them, and that's only for 26 years. I've got...
and they have to spend it on themselves.
Yeah, it's strict rules. I've got 152 staff members who've been with us 10 years, 47 longer than 15, and every year those people who have been with me more than 20 years, and we're only 26 years old, I take them to Parliament for lunch. Last year I took 17 people. I mean, this level of staff loyalty is so easy just to gloss over. I mean, it's spectacular. I think it's a lot to do with, I don't know what word to use, perhaps it's leadership. I tell them that they are special people doing special work, and they'll go home and they'll feel they've done something that very few people ever will. Our guys are rejected by the aged care industry, which is a disgrace. It's nothing short of a disgrace. There was never any reason to set up Wintringham. Should never have been a reason. It still shouldn't be a reason that we exist. Elderly Australians, regardless of income, should have access to aged care services. So for these staff to be doing that in such often difficult circumstances fills me with great pride. I am enormously proud of my staff. They are really very special people. That's not just idle comment. That's what I mean.
I do. I'm sure we understand that. And from the point of view of the provision of care, is that continuity, that long-term employment important?
You talking to me?
Yes,
You want to
please, or Ms. Russ?
Look, it is, and I think again the consistency of care and support that you can give
Yes.
residents and clients is that's what's evident if you keep people on. Someone like me, for example, who's been at Wintringham for so long, it's so lovely because I know, and Bryan knows the people too, we actually know the people we look after and we're actually interested and we can actually support them through a range of different services. From the moment we pick someone up as an outreach worker, which might have been in my case, to, one day they might be in our highest care home. And so we can track these people and then they know us and they trust us. So when we used to have people who were resistant to moving into care, as people have talked about today, very few people I would meet, almost none, want to move into residential. They want to be in a house or a unit somewhere of their own.
Yes.
So, we used to be able to go to someone like Bryan who actually knew these people from the early years to actually say to them, you got to trust us, you're not doing okay, there's another option, just trust us, give us a try and we'll make sure you're okay. And that relationship with residents over a really long period of time has really stood us in good stead, I think, because the people we look after actually know us and rely on us and trust that we will be looking after them.
I know it's a generalisation, but I've often said that it appears to me that people work in homelessness for a month or the rest of their life. It's like a drug. You get so attached to them. There's no one else around. I did notice, made a little note about a comment that was made earlier today about staff consistency. When my mum was in aged care, she had Alzheimer's. She was taken to a hospital because she had a UTI, and I don't think she was ever needed to go there, but anyway, they took her. And over the space of about 6 days, she had something like 7 beds, and maybe 50 staff went through her life. And her stay there. And by the time she came back to the hostel, she already had Alzheimer's, but she was all over the shop. And the staff couldn't explain it. And I said, well, I can. She's confused. So having consistent staff is terribly important. I was given some really good advice in my first week at work by a dear woman who I'm still very fond of, who said, I've only got one piece of advice. She said, stay. Just stay, because so many people cycle through your clients' lives. If there's a one spot, I'll still get phone calls from a bloke saying my pension hasn't come. It's not often, but that's what I'm trying to get at. There's got to be consistency. So when you wander through the site, like you found when you came, people were wandering and coming up to us. They knew us. This is terribly important.
Yes.
Terribly important.
And people leave. It's interesting. So there are some staff who do move on and they actually come back and we always take people back. But it is interesting, and they themselves say, look, we thought we'd try something else, and we encourage people if they want to look elsewhere, do other things. But we've had even a couple of managers, haven't we, Bryan, who've actually returned to Wintringham after going somewhere else, and I think realising that it's very unique. Yeah.
The last topic that I want to ask you about, and certainly not least important, is financing.
Yeah.
You both talk about the ACFI, the Aged Care Funding Instrument, and how that is applicable or not particularly applicable to your situation. And I just want to ask you generally about the financing of the Wintringham model. So perhaps you...
Yeah, well,
start with
it's extraordinarily difficult. Aged care, as I said before, is predicated around, let's say it's around me and my mum. You know, I had to pay accommodation bond, which I got back. In between, I was there most days, if not most days, at least once a week, buying her undies and
Appointments.
flowers. Yeah, when she went to a dentist, I had to take a day off work so I could help take her to the dentist, calm her down while the strange man put his hand in her mouth, get her back to her home, help get her undressed into bed. She was quite distraught. By the time she fell asleep, it was most of the day gone. Now, of course, that's fine. I do that. But at Wintringham, I've got to pay someone, what, $25 an hour to do that. So there's massive cost differentials. We now have 6 aged care facilities and building another 2 at the moment. They're normally traditionally funded through accommodation bonds. We don't get any bonds. So clearly, the capital side of it alone is a massive problem that the industry has not yet addressed. Every facility I build has to be begged, borrowed and stolen money from all sorts of sources to accumulate enough before we can start. And then you get into the recurrent subsidies. The recurrent subsidies are increasingly being targeted at activities of daily living or clinical care.
Yes.
And again, coming from the nursing model, which is fine, but that's only part of the life story. Our guys have much more behavioural problems, and that's not recognised at all. So we've been able to get a homeless supplement, an extraordinarily difficult process to get that, and then recently got it increased a little bit, but it's still nowhere near what it should be. It's really important that I ram this further, push this further. Wintringham is taking the most difficult clients that the aged care industry, for-profit, not-for-profit, has turned its back on, and they expect us to do it with less money than mainstream. That's outrageous. No other words for it. That's just simply outrageous. You either say the elderly poor are not entitled to aged care. Make that a statement and stand by it. Or you say they are entitled. And if they are entitled, well then fund us so we can do it. It's really simple.
Ms Rice, we traditionally give witnesses an opportunity to say anything finally that they would like to convey to the Commission. Is there anything in addition you would like to add? Don't feel compelled to, but here's the opportunity.
Look, I suppose the only comment I would make is that I feel particularly privileged to be a social worker managing a residential care home, because I think for me that was really unusual to have an opportunity. I mean, I've always thought, oh, it's a nursing job and you have to, have that clinical experience and background. That was my perception, even working in somewhere like Wintringham. So I think I've been able to show myself and hopefully Wintringham that there's a role for allied health professionals in this sector, in management, in running really good homes. And I think it's just, for me, it's such a great fit from my social work training and background to be able to deliver the sort of care and support that particularly older Australians can benefit from. I think having that social work perspective's been absolutely fantastic, and I think it's a real asset in running homes like we do, or running any sort of aged care homes, I think.
Yeah, we certainly don't want to say one profession is better than the other. That's not the point. We're just saying that there seems to be a shift much more towards the nursing side, and maybe it needs to be addressed a little bit. I have a couple of points I'd like to make.
Can I just follow up on that before you go on? Are you aware of there being anywhere in this sector some work done on the skill sets or the capabilities that people might need to run an aged care facility of any kind? Or is it just that we've had the historical model of a nurse doing that?
Well, look, I'm not. I do know when I started there was a big battle not to have a nurse running it. I think that we just have to find a way that they can have input in it. Kate couldn't run it on her own.
No.
Correct?
Yep, absolutely.
So we have a team of, we developed our own model, how it works. But I don't, in terms of your answer, I don't know. But Kate is not alone at Wintringham. We have other people. We have an OT in a very senior position. We have a recreation worker who's running a nursing home, a hostel. Psychologist, yeah. So, but we are. It's not the norm, but it is. The point of my statements is really just to express it. It's a thought bubble. I just think that our experiences that other professions could well be of use.
And community aged care does it. That was the thing for me
that's
that I
the
didn't quite
thing.
understand in community care and all the home care packages. It's all an allied health model. And then moving into residential was quite different. So
Quite opposite.
yeah.
The two things I want to say. Firstly, we're now working in prisons, and I think that's a really interesting area. I don't know if the Commission has time to look at that issue. Prisoners currently are outside of aged care and yet are in desperate need. It's the fastest growing cohort in prisons, and certainly should be. We're very proud. We've been working awfully long and hard to get into it, and we are now got our toe in, perhaps a few more than just a toe, but it's getting there. So that's really important for us. The other one I was going to mention, which is again just a thought bubble, and dismiss it if you want, but one of my professions is actually I'm an economist. And I always understood that tax concessions were invented by economists to encourage the development of services in an unviable market. So if the government doesn't want to deliver the services itself, it provides tax incentives to an organisation to go into an unviable part of the market, and through the tax concessions, they remain viable. I go back to my point before. Wintringham shouldn't have needed to exist. When I was at the night shelter, I didn't make one placement in an aged care facility. And to this day, it's still extremely difficult to get into mainstream aged care. And yet, a lot of these organisations are getting tax concessions. So my little thought bubble is you eliminate the tax concessions, and you make it an equal playing field for profit and for not-for-profit, and then make it a zero-sum game, and you take all of those tax concessions the government has recouped and direct it at the pointy end of those organisations that want to work with either disability or Koori or homeless.
That concludes my questions, Commissioners.
Mr. Lipmann, it struck me as we were watching that video that 5 of the 6 of your residents who spoke were under 65 and would not normally fit within the government funding model for aged care. You made an intriguing comment at one stage during the visit to Port Melbourne about you have your methods of obtaining funding. I'm just wondering, without giving away any trade secrets, how you managed to get round the under 65s.
Well, it's actually very interesting because when I started Wintringham, a lot of the guys were, a lot of the men and some of the women were under 65, and we, in order to get them in, I read the Act, and the Act actually doesn't say a day. So, and then I heard that the Koori argument has relied on 50 and above, and largely for the lifestyle reasons of premature ageing. So I used that same argument, that was accepted. So really, any organisation in Australia should be able to take people 50 and above if they're prematurely aged through homelessness. And that worked reasonably successfully for 20 odd years, 25 years. There were some ACAS teams that were very resistant to that idea, and some embraced it greatly. The ones that embraced it realised that we were actually providing care to clients that they can't place elsewhere, where other ACAS saw their role more as a gatekeeper to the industry, to the sector. Where it's become a lot more complicated now, and Kate's better off to talk about this than I, but the development of the NDIS. And so now we have a significant problem of people who are under 65, instead of being admitted to aged care, they've got to go through NDIS first. And that can take a very long time and then receive, in some cases, a negative result. Meantime, what people need to understand is that the resident or the client is not sitting at home with a loving family being looked after through that year where all this is done. They're actually on the streets and they can die, or we can lose them. So there's a major issue that needs to be addressed, and we would have to say that it's unsatisfactory at the moment. You all right?
Anything arising?
No, thank you, Commissioner.
Mr. Lipmann and Ms. Rice, I think I speak for both of us when I say we're in awe of the work you're doing in the community and the care you're providing for people who otherwise simply, as you've said, would be on the streets is remarkable. And we're exceedingly grateful to you for coming all this way to tell us the story of Wintringham and all that you're doing, and we're, I think, also very grateful to know that your services are in the process of being expanded because there's obviously a great need out there. Thank you both very much for coming.
Thank you.